Hello, my name is Eric Zavinski.
I'm Todd Crawford.
We are too cool for the comic shop, and today we'll be dedicating our time to the full 4-hour master cut of our podcast because we're going to be reviewing a special movie today, aren't we, Todd?
We are, and we are only reviewing one version of the special movie today.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it'll probably draw some comparisons for posterity's sake, we are, of course, talking about Justice League, and more specifically, Zack Snyder's Justice League that just came out on HBO Max this month of 2021. After a whole long story of does this cut exist? Why won't it come out? And why he got screwed in the first place, and a whole bunch of stuff. And I must say, I was a naysayer before going into this cut of the movie because I truly had no idea what to expect. Didn't know how different it would be. I remember just being, lukewarm about the original theatrical cut in 2017, and just really not enjoying it, thinking it was a pretty mediocre movie. Todd and I on this channel, we've already reviewed Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. So this is the trilogy capper, if you will, in terms of Zack Snyder DCEU movies. But we never got that until recently. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, so I've never seen the full Justice League. So I've seen clips of it online, but I haven't seen the full thing. So for me, this viewing is the only version of Justice League that I've seen. And I never watched it because I always felt like this was going to get released at some point in some capacity. Maybe not in as full of one as we got, but I figured there's going to be some release of some sort that was closer to the original vision, or at least the originally filmed vision. And I have to say I feel better for that. Not like for everyone, but for me personally, I'm glad that I didn't sully my view of the movie with what appears to be the inferior version.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that seems to be a pretty fair perspective. I only watched the original theatrical release by Joss Whedon, this little hybrid monster that they made between Zack Snyder's work and then the Joss Whedon sugarcoating that they made. I only watched it once in the theaters, never rewatched it. So my memory is pretty fuzzy. But even I knew the drastic changes that even scenes that still existed in both cuts of the movie were completely recontextualized. The tone was different. Characters were different. The way characters were shot was different, or just you name it. Almost everything was different, even for the footage that is in both cuts. And I'll tell you, there really isn't much of a sensical story that exists that is remaining in the Joss Whedon Justice League. I refuse to say Justice League because it makes me want to throw up. So I'm just going to say different words to describe that. But you're just truly missing out on nothing. It really is a kind of carbon copy Avengers 1 or 2, which Joss Whedon directed, kind of just trying to make it like that, but it's so painfully obvious that they're trying to make it like that. They're trying to make all these DC characters in this very dark adaptation of a universe try to quip off of each other all of a sudden, and they're all kind of dicks to each other. Like, we'll get into the specifics of Zack Snyder's plot later. But something that I was just pleasantly surprised about was that the characters weren't dicks to each other for no reason. They sure are in the Joss Whedon version. Like, nobody likes each other. Nobody has any real depth or emotion. Everybody's just doing one-liners. It's truly a night and day experience, especially the second half of the movie, and compare both of those.
Yeah, that's a funny point you bring up with, in my opinion, just Joss Whedon projects in general. Is that I know a lot of people when I was growing up that hated the show Friends and thought the characters were just like miserable people that just judge everyone and they're just, what, snide, I think is the word I'm looking for. And really, that's how I feel about like watching Joss Whedon movies. I just feel like they're a bunch of pricks for basically no reason. And I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen his version, but it sounds to me as though nobody's arguing, even if you like his kind of stuff, which for the most part I don't. It's not the best. It's not the highest caliber of his work, and it's really just this weird Frankenstein project that was rushed into post production. I guess he dealt with, or I guess reshoots and then post production would be technically true. And the whole thing's just rushed, and it seems just like it was a loveless affair to completion after Zack Snyder left the project.
Yes, and all the studio interference, I think, is obviously a good chunk to blame for the product that we originally got in theaters. It's just kind of a bummer. It feels like the studio wanted to get rid or get over with this Justice League arc and their cinematic universe, which is bizarre because that's kind of what it was building toward. And at the time, there was originally supposed to be a Justice League Part 1 and a Justice League Part 2, like I think back-to-back years with movies. So maybe originally the Snyder Cut was either going to be what we got and a sequel, or what we got split into two movies. It's kind of hard to say just what their plans were with Justice League and how much that changed. Very bizarre. But to go back to your point on Joss Whedon, basically, I think we can sum it up this way. You and I have reviewed Infinity War and Endgame, the last two Avengers films, on this podcast. I don't think you and I have any desire to talk about the original Avengers or Age of Ultron on this channel, because I don't know, those movies just aren't as interesting to me. They're not bad, but I don't think I don't think they're worth like talking about when everybody else already has. So that's my view on what I've heard are his best movies. I don't know. He definitely has his fans as a director, but and that's not even counting all of the stuff. It doesn't seem like the stars of the film like Joss Whedon very much. It's just kind of funny. Seems like he might have been a dick in real life, so I don't know. He might be a part of that cast of friends who's looking out at the naked guy in the studio apartment.
Yeah, my thing with Joss Whedon, my biggest contention with him, because a lot of it boils down to like taste. Like he's very influenced by like kind of Shakespearean dialogue and all this stuff, and it's like a weird kind of meta thing. For instance, one of my favorite shows, which Joss Whedon actually is it not a guest star, but as a guest appearance on, is Veronica Mars, which is a very similar approach, and that's a TV show. Like I'm not going to talk shit on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I think
Right.
and that's talking about him as a writer, but even more so as a director. I think that's where his talents probably lie, because in Avengers, for instance, and he corrected this in Age of Ultron, to give credit. It was filmed for there was like TV aspect ratio and shit like that, and I've said it so many times over the years that it's just a redundant point for me to mention, but I think he lowered the bar for American blockbuster cinema with that movie. I think he made the quality of American cinema worse when that movie caught on. And a lot of people talk about how that was a team-up movie that showed you can do it. It showed you can do these long-term investments as a studio. And that's true as well. But for me, his cinematography, the action sequences, if you go back and watch them, it looks so embarrassingly dated compared to even something, and I know that people criticize Christopher Nolan's choreography, even compared to The Dark Knight or The Dark Knight Rises, which came out the same year, I believe, if not like a few months later into the next year, whatever. One was like spring, one was fall. I think it was the same year. It's just so bad, and I don't understand why he did it. And for Age of Ultron, I don't know about the aspect ratio, but the cinematography was much better. However, interestingly enough, when he came on to Justice League, he set it to TV aspect ratio. He put these horrible color grading filters on. He just, and when you have a director like Zack Snyder, I mean, people love him, people hate him, but I don't think anybody's saying he can't frame a shot. I don't think anybody's saying that he doesn't know what he wants and achieves it. But he's highly cinematic. He's an auteur. And you can like it or hate it, but it's a very specific style. So when you take that and then reframe it and then add a weird color over it and then like cut it in a choppy, quippy kind of way and then do insert shots of someone else's cinematography when the actors are bloated or lost the muscle weight and all that, it's very jarring, even in the scenes that I've seen.
Yes, and I can testify that that is correct for the whole film. Joss Whedon Justice League is just so oversaturated with color, basically to the point of Avengers. But man, it just does not fit for the feel of this universe, especially when that's already been established in, say, Man of Steel and BVS. You don't even have to necessarily like those movies to see what we're talking about here. I think just consistency in your universe is nice in terms of style. And Zack Snyder's got a very unique and what's the word? I mean, he's just very passionate about delivering his style. So whether you like all the overzealous slow motion and sometimes the colors feel absent, I mean, that is part of the identity. So I would rather have somebody stick to an identity for a reason because they believe in it rather than just like make the movie colorful. I mean, to be honest, I have a bunch of awesome DC animated movies that I can watch if I want a ton of color in my my DC stuff. So I really don't mind that much. So I don't know that the fact that even the colors and framing in some cases is different between the cuts just really tells you everything. It just there is nothing that isn't changed from the two versions of the movie. It's just kind of remarkable. I was watching the Zack Snyder cut with my fiance, and he had never seen the theatrical original Justice League. I was just like telling him throughout the movie, I was like, "Hey, yeah, you like this scene with this character development or the way it's shot or whatever? Yeah, that didn't exist in the original." He's just like constantly amused at all the things that have been changed and now made better.
Yeah, it's funny because despite being a 4-hour film, it doesn't feel like there's that much you could really trim off. There's certain little things, I suppose, but I didn't feel it drag. I wasn't bored at any point in it. I can say towards the very end, with the epilogue specifically, and there's one scene reshot, and I believe it's reshot over Zoom, at least partially, due to COVID restrictions and filming other projects with the actors, or the actors were filming other projects. That particular part came off as though it could have been trimmed, but that's during the epilogue, and that's kind of added in after the fact, so I'm not going to include that. But I think it's a surprisingly, not 100%, but it's a surprisingly tight movie considering the runtime.
No, I agree with that. And I think some of the epilogue stuff was probably, honestly, at this point, Zack Snyder realizing, like, oh, fans want to see everything that would have been, might have been. I'm just going to stuff this epilogue full of all of our ideas. Who knows? Maybe the studio will let us continue with this vision. And that's kind of what the epilogue felt like to me. It just kind of felt like an SOS call, like, hey, look at all these ideas that we actually have for sequels and building the universe. So, because I went back to watch a couple scenes at the end. Yeah, the epilogue truly is 30 minutes. It is Lord of the Rings: Return of the King level, which I enjoyed it, so I didn't really mind. But it is very long epilogue. But just overall, Colton and I didn't really mind the runtime. I don't think I've ever watched a 4-hour film, to be honest. I think most of my longest viewings have been like 3.5 hours. I think this is just the longest movie I've ever watched in one sitting before. And I didn't really care. There were definitely some parts in certain scenes, especially toward the beginning. Like, for example, the people are singing about Aquaman, and that lasts for like a minute or two, and it's just kind of like, okay, that's a little overindulgent. I could see here and there where they could cut things. But that's still, it's all part of the style. It's all part of the character introductions. So, I mean, there's definitely a 3.5 hour cut of this movie that is probably tighter. But that being said, I was never like bored or pissed that they didn't go with a shorter version.
Yeah, that's true for sure. There are definitely moments with that kind of thing where you could see where it could be trimmed for the theatrical cut. Personally, for me, this is going to be weird, but that scene with Aquaman's my favorite scene in the movie.
I mean, it's a good scene until they start just like singing about him, which I don't know.
It's amazing.
There's something about like the singing, and then especially the freaking Wonder Woman chanting in this movie that just makes me laugh.
See, my thing with this thing, there's two things. Is just I love the mysticism of it and all that, and I love it just becomes like a Terrence Malick movie randomly for a minute or two. But I also just love it because it reminds me of in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, there's a theme song that they sing to summon King Ghidorah, and or is it him or King Caesar? I think it's King Ghidorah. And
okay,
but anyhow, it's so similar to that scene that it cracks me up.
I mean, it is kind of like that larger than life cheesiness of like Aquaman is our messiah and all that stuff. Like, I get it, but that's, part of the cheese is why it makes me so amused. So even the stuff that I thought was like too indulgent in this movie still entertains me, still makes me laugh. Like, the Flash is a completely new introduction. He like kind of has a weird stalker vibe and saving this woman and touching her wieners that are floating in midair because it's all slow motion. It like lasts for like 30 seconds at least, and it is a vision. You can tell it's a vision.
It is, and I feel like on one hand it's almost like, like Snyder, the studio, or whoever was like, you know what, if you want this, we're just gonna give you the full fucking thing. You're gonna get all the Snyderisms. You're gonna get everything.
I mean, that's what people wanted at this point. So it's actually kind of an envious position at the end of the day, because while Zack Snyder got screwed for a few years, I think at this point, the fans, the people who are calling for the original vision to come out, they were very clear in being like, give us all of it. So as a director, he's so well established at this point, he can be like, yeah, you want to see all the dumb funny shit that I do as well as the awesome epic shit, and everybody's like, but nobody has anything left to lose, basically. Like, this is a movie that's coming out on streaming only at the current time, and the other cut of the movie does exist, so the people who want that, they're not going to really be offended that this exists, but the people who do want this, oh my god, something to gain. It's just a funny experience. I know you've been trailing this for a long time. You were super excited just because of like what it means for art and artists, and to get their vision out there. Because I know, like you, like many people, were very upset that the project was bastardized and that there was no clear artistic integrity in this film for 4 years.
Yeah. So. Well, one thing I want to bring up with the silly stuff, and there's a few points you brought up, I'll just address kind of point by point. I think it was a professional reviewer, but I could be wrong, that said, when you think about it, Batman saying fuck is silly at face value, but it's also badass. And in a way, isn't that Batman in a nutshell? And that's really the whole movie, in a way, is that it is very silly. It is hyper machismo in some places, or just overly artistic for what it is in others. But it's also fucking cool. And
Right, and I honestly think that's a distinction between Marvel and DC sometimes, even outside of their movie universes. Like, if you compare certain comic books, certain animated films between Marvel and DC, just DC has always felt like the kind of auteur's comic book company. And that's kind of why I've always been a DC guy over a Marvel guy, even if I have to admit that Marvel usually has a better idea for what they want their projects to be. I don't know, there's just kind of like this the mythos of the DC characters feels a bit more grandiose. Um, even going back to the comic books, it just feels that way to me. Even though there's lots of similar character archetypes, there are gods in both Marvel and DC. They're very similar characters. I think a lot of it comes down to who are your main characters. Superman is our space Jesus boy. Um, like the leader of the Avengers is nowhere near like being completely overpowered in that way. So when your front man is like literally space Jesus, I think that just kind of really sets the bar for the level of grandness that your characters are in support. And this trilogy, if you will, of Zack Snyder's started with Man of Steel. So it really makes a lot of sense that there is just a different air of mysticism about these characters that like compared to like say Marvel's Avengers.
yeah, and there's also a very different approach to how they're depicted. And because the thing is that DC indulges in what it is. It just is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, and there is humor to it. And for instance, like Aquaman, for instance, there's scenes where like they're riding giant seahorses, and there's giant turtles with rockets on them and shit, and they're fighting, and there's a shark monster, and like a big demon from Doom or whatever, and Aquaman's riding it, and it's ridiculous, but it's having fun with that. It's just riding that wave. Sorry for the bad pun, that wasn't intended, but
No, it's much appreciated. We need more puns in this episode.
Marvel
To start counting.
on the other hand, would have Tony Stark look at it and say something about how it's silly or whatever. Be like, what is this? A demon from Doom? Or you get fucking Rocket Raccoon. And it's like, hey Ratchet, get this, and it's just constantly like commenting on itself. And really, it comes off to some extent, to me at least, is artistic insecurity after a certain point. Not with like, like I quoted some of the like Endgame, which is one of the better Marvel movies, but some of the lesser ones especially. It comes off as though like the scene with like the cuss word at the beginning of Avengers Age of Ultron, which I personally had fun with in theaters and haven't put one thought about since. Like it comes off desperate, where they have to put clips in there, they have to fill the void with something, so we're going to be self-aware because we don't actually have substance here, so we're just going to be meta, and it's a loop of commenting on oneself rather than actually investing in anything. Whereas DC's just like,
no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
DC's just like,
and
yeah, we're ridiculous and we are what we are, and you can have fun with it, you can think it's silly, but we're going to entertain you.
it's funny because I think I've heard it described as like, other than the Joss Whedon Justice League, like DC believes in itself is how I've heard it described, and I think that's pretty accurate. Like you have all of these movies that believe in themselves, even if some of them are pretty atrocious. Like Suicide Squad, a couple of their films, they're weaker than some. Even Batman versus Superman, for all of its flaws, like that movie freaking believes in itself. It is very committed to what it is, and this version of Justice League also does that extremely well. So I think that's kind of the difference, which you could argue is the cheesier route, the hokier route, because I do think that the MCU is kind of like kind of brainwashed people in some respects of being like, oh well, this is how superhero movies are done, and this is the way they have to be done. Which I don't have that opinion at all. To be honest, I'm glad that we have an awesome couple Avengers movies And now we have an awesome Justice League, and they're both very different. They both fill different roles. I'm just very happy about, because the old Joss Whedon Justice League felt like an Avengers ripoff, and it didn't feel like DC was getting the unique treatment that it deserved on the movie scene. But now we have it, and they're just very different takes. So, I mean, if we're going to have two giant superhero team movies out there in the past decade, like, I'd want them to be different.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I guess nobody planned on Justice League happening how it did, because originally I had heard they wanted I think they actually talked to Ben Affleck about doing Justice League. They talked to George Miller, who did the Mad Max movies and Babe and Babe Big in the City and Happy Feet, about doing it, and those both would have been inspired good choices for it. Joss Whedon to do it would have been uninspired because he had already done Avengers. It's like hiring J.J. Abrams to do Star Wars after Star Trek. You can like what he does or not like what he does, but hiring the guy that made Star Trek to do Star Wars is pretty uninspired. It's on the nose. And same with getting the Avengers guy to do fair. Justice League.
That's fair. I will have to make another comparison to Star Wars for a moment, because, like, we talked about Star Wars and the sequel trilogy. All its lack of planning feels exceedingly well planned in comparison to whatever the hell they had as a plan for the DCEU at Warner Brothers. And I just, like you said, like, they were considering 5 different directors, and then they were going to do 2 Justice League movies, but then they scrapped that idea completely and then went with completely different movie projects against the ones that they had originally, like, slated. And it's just, the DC landscape has definitely been a victim of studio interference, and it is wild. And I hope that we, I don't know, get some of the movies that they were originally promised. Because if you look 4 years ago at the DC movie slate, there was some cool stuff on the horizon, especially when considering now that Zack Snyder's Justice League is so good. Because there was supposed to be a Flash movie, there was supposed to be a Cyborg movie, then I think originally in 2020 there was supposed to be a Green Lantern Corps movie, and who knows, that could have been like the actual good Green Lantern movie we never got and now might never get. So, I mean, just hopefully this cut of the film has taught us, like, I don't know, we kind of had it good. We had plans, maybe, so maybe those plans can come back.
Yeah, so one thing I don't think a lot of people know about this movie, and so I guess there's a lot of pressure to get it released for, I think, before Christmas or something like that, because I think around that next year was when Warner Brothers, it was then known as Warner Bros., now it's Warner Media, but whatever, was going to be bought by AT&T, or the contracts were just up for many of the people running it, so they wanted to shit it out so they could get their paychecks, and they can get that Avengers money real quick with their big team-up movie. Now, it's been kind of unclear exactly the nature of Zack Snyder's departure. Some people say they're already trying to kind of force him out. Some people say this or that. What he has officially said on record at this point is that he left it of his own will because of the tragedy in his family, and he said he didn't have the strength to fight the studio. And he said every film is a fight with the studio to get your vision out. But who knows the degree of it? But clearly, circumstance played a major factor in that happening, as well as this rush to push the movie out. And then they also said they wanted the movie under or at 2 hours. And so anyhow, what I'm saying is, with BVS, with Suicide Squad, it's particularly the theatrical cut of BVS, and Suicide Squad, which never got a director's cut or anything like that, at least to my knowledge, they were made by these producers who seem to be the ones calling the shots, who are the ones like, we need this runtime, we don't care if the movie makes sense if we trim this scene. Suicide Squad was butchered by some music video company that edited the first hour only, I guess, of the movie or something insane like that. And the director, David Ayer, has said for years, I have a version of the movie that's much better, and everybody's like, oh, bullshit. And I think Suicide Squad is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in theaters. It's top 3 easily worst theatrical experience of my life. But a part of me is thinking now, you know what? Fuck it. Let him release his version.
Yeah, you're more inclined to believe that there actually is a superior version out there at this point because of what we've been through.
Yeah, maybe not good, but better. One thing I'll say
exactly
is that, you know, as much as I would love to see a continuation of this series, I am very grateful though that we got Joker. Aquaman, I guess, mostly goes off the Snyder cut rather than the theatrical Justice League already, but I love Aquaman. Shazam's kind of loose as well, where Batman's in it, Superman's in it, but it's not really married to any version of them for the most part, other than the designs are in line with the DCEU. I love that movie. I think the new Batman seems interesting. So at least the stuff coming out, at least in my opinion as an audience member, is quality stuff, whichever direction they go. And fortunately, the studio producers or studio heads, whatever, at least the people who seem to have been tampering with it, which is just like 2 or 3 bad years up till Justice League, it seems like they're long gone at this point. And it seems like they were really the ones that were fucking all these projects over, at least from what I've seen.
I mean, it's very easy to agree with that. I mean, at best, from the looks of it, you know, Zack Snyder had a personal tragedy. For him to have continued with the original film had to have been delayed into 2018 for personal reasons. And so, hey, that didn't work for people wanting to get their money. So at best, it's a crime of circumstance. And at worst, it's like an actual, we use the death of your daughter to further force you out, which just, it's all so gross. I don't want to think about it, but it seems horrible.
I've known people. Oh, sorry. I've known people who were so against the Snyder Cut getting released. At first, they denied it was ever going to get released. It's impossible. It's all this other stuff. And I've always said, you know, it exists in some form. The CGI may be unfinished, you know, all that. But a work print of it exists to some capacity. Which a lot of people have said. And that was debated. But then I knew people were pissed when they said, oh, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to give them money to fix the special effects and all that, so it's, you know, ready to be released and viewed as a normal movie rather than just a demo, essentially. And they were pissed about it. And I would always say the same thing. I would explain that situation where I'd say, so his daughter passed away. He was forced out of a project. Someone else came in who at this point has been, I don't know how he's still getting work, if he still will continue to, because Joss Whedon's been Me Too'd as much as anybody in Hollywood at this point. I mean, he seems like a total beta male pervert piece of shit. And at the very least,
and I believe he was not super hot on Ray Fisher's Cyborg character, and that's part of the reason, I guess, why he might have gotten like the complete shaft, because Cyborg doesn't have shit worth a story in the Joss Whedon version of Justice League.
Yeah, which is insane because he's so integral to this version.
He is completely integral to the plot, and honestly, this whole situation, because you're talking about people not wanting the version to come out. First of all, on principle, I was always fine with it because just artistic integrity, that's always good. But I didn't really believe it was going to be good because honestly, I had just had no idea how truly different movie could have been and how much it was changed. I mean, honestly, this whole Zack Snyder Justice League experience has been very educational for me. So the next time a studio screws over a director and then 4 years later a different version of the movie comes out, I will be way more inclined to give it a chance and to be less jaded about the idea, because now I've been through this where I can know that, yeah, the movie can be completely different in almost every single way. It's just been very educational.
Yeah, I would always say to those people that were so against it, because I kind of figured like you, I didn't figure it would be a good movie. I figured it would be something I'd appreciate but may not enjoy, or, you know, be like a mixed bag or whatever. But I figure, like, at the
Right.
very least, people who want to see it can see it. And this was long before I became a fan of these movies, as we've documented in the Man of Steel BVS episode. I did not like those movies at all when this was going on. It's very, very recent that I've turned over and started liking those movies in the last year, probably. Maybe a year and a half at this point. But not too long before we started the podcast. But I would always say to people who are so against it being released at all, I'd say, can you explain your position morally? How is it ethical for you not to want this to be out, to bring people joy, to give this man his closure after such a personal tragedy and after such clear corporate greed just fucked him over?
Right.
What's your moral stance on this that makes you feel right? And I've never gotten an answer once.
Yeah, I mean, the only answer that I could possibly understand as like reasoning, and it's not even a good answer, is that, oh, there are two versions of this movie now, and we're in a cinematic universe, so we don't know which movie is canon of the two. But then my response to that is, and you got on this a little bit as well, there were no movies after 2017 Justice League that felt like a sequel in any way. Like, then there was like Aquaman and Shazam, and it didn't seem like those movies' stories were contingent on what happened in Justice League really at all. So it all just kind of felt disjointed anyway. Not to mention that the original Joss Whedon Justice League sucks, and there is like barely no plot. There's no story. Like, for example, like all of the stuff with the mother boxes, and like why all these crazy people from space want to screw up Earth, just never explained. Never. Nothing is ever gone into as to why things are happening in the original Justice League. So if anything, it just feels like we filled in story gaps with Zack Snyder's version. We didn't really even lose anything story related from the Joss Whedon version because they didn't have any content to begin with. So it's just really a net gain the way that I see it, having seen both of the films.
Yeah, and what's a funny thing to me is that I've noticed how quickly, like, I'm seeing it, and not like I'm not in any groups like Zack Snyder posting on Facebook, or, I'm not going to like releasethesnydercut.org for this, but just on my Facebook timeline with just people I know, different writers or just movie fans. It's shocking to see how universally accepted this movie is, how people just immediately have adapted to it. And it's like, it's funny because like we don't even really need to call it Zack Snyder's Justice League at this point. We could just call it Justice League, and I think people would assume we're talking about this version even though it's been out for like a week, if that.
Right. No, absolutely. I think it's only been like a week, right?
I think to the
at the
day,
time of
actually.
recording this. Yeah. And even that being said, it's like it already feels like the 2017 version has been wiped off the map. So you flash forward a couple years, flash forward. Yeah, nobody's ever going to talk about the Justice League ever again. And it makes me wonder about other movies that get other significant edits, significant different cuts. I don't know. I think you and I are fans of The Godfather because they're coming out with a more director
The death of Michael
inspired.
Corleone.
Yeah, the death of Michael Corleone. So they're gonna make Godfather Part 3 like not have the sucky kissing cousins crap, I guess, and just kind of make the movie that, the good parts of Godfather 3, because I think that movie is actually pretty good, minus like a half hour of it. So that'd be very interesting to see how that turns out, for example.
I have that sitting on my shelf, on my bookshelf. I've had it for weeks now, and I need to give it a shot, but it's still like a 3.5 hour movie. I think it's only 3 hours actually, but a pretty damn long movie. And from what I'm hearing,
I've been thinking about like rewatching the Godfather trilogy, but when I rewatch Part 3, I guess I should just watch this new version because I'm just really inclined to basically believe in movie directors. If the movie director had a vision, then it's probably better than whatever the studio forced them to crap out.
I generally, I've talked about this before on the Long Shot Books channel, where I've gone into auteur theory, and that some people are against it. And I mean, I definitely understand that every individual has limitations, but for instance, like the people that really want to tear down Lucas and say, oh, the movie was saved in editing, it wasn't even a very good movie before it was edited. What movie is a fucking movie before it's edited? You know, like some people are so desperate to get rid of visionaries, and I'm not saying that his wife editing didn't help. I'm not saying that Zack Snyder doesn't benefit from Henry Cavill being a great Superman, or from Junkie XL's score that enhances the mood of the scenes that he films. But
I mean, all movies are collaborative projects, but at the end of the day, they're helmed by a person to have like some cohesion.
exactly, yeah, someone has to captain the ship. And my opinion is always, I would rather see someone shoot for the stars and fail than to see a board of people deciding what is most digestible for audiences. And this is going to be arrogant, but I think that there's two kinds of people. People who follow auteur theory, and people who are willing to accept mediocrity.
Right. I mean, that's pretty fair. And I think what entertainment means to you usually comes into this discussion. If you're also a storyteller, or if you're also passionate about like quality of the entertainment that we're consuming, probably more often than not gonna ride on the auteur side of things, like say you and I would, because it's kind of the world we live in, right? We have a podcast where we talk about the pros and cons and the merits of all these pop culture phenomenon, right? And so it just makes sense. It makes sense to me. The way you can even look at it is economic, right? It's like there are different jobs that people get paid to do. Studio gets paid to basically support, produce a movie, get it out there. The director gets paid to have a vision, basically make art. He gets paid to do. Really, at the end of the day, I mean, that's just logical to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, getting back to the movie, one thing that I think's interesting is how I'm trying to think of all the different villain names and stuff. It's going to be that hour for me forgetting names. So there's because there's two. There's Darkseid, and he's the main bad guy, right? Like, as in like the higher up.
Yes. How much do you know about Darkseid from like cartoons or comics or anything like that?
Like nothing.
Okay. So I know a bit more. I have some DC knowledge. Not encyclopedic to any degree. In fact, Colton and I looked up like Darkseid's minions after the movie, and we just like kept laughing because there's some truly outrageous characters.
Right.
But yeah, basically, people who say Darkseid is like a Thanos ripoff, obviously they're dumb, because I'm pretty sure Darkseid came first. Like if you're talking about the character's origins. Darkseid and Thanos are very different, but they are similar. They're both like space gremlins who want to take over things. The difference being Thanos is more of a human character, and they really go into that in the Avengers movies, whereas Darkseid is basically just Hitler. He's just a very angry dude, and he wants to take over the universe. He doesn't have a whole lot of dimensions to him, but it's kind of what people like about him. So Darkseid is just Satan. He's just freaking Satan. He is very powerful. So yeah, that's obviously what this, now that we know what Zack Snyder's vision was, this is what they've been building toward. Remember the crazy Batman vision dream sequence in BVS?
Yeah, the nightmare.
Yeah, so the nightmare had Darkseid symbol, that Omega symbol carved into the dirt. So really, all the way back in 2016, we knew that Zack Snyder wanted to do like the Darkseid stuff and build up to that. So seeing his cut of Justice League, oh my god, everything makes so much more sense, because I don't believe Darkseid is in the Joss Whedon version at all. Like literally zero. He might be referenced. I can't remember for sure, but he's certainly never seen. You never get that whole, oh, Loki, Thanos, like there's a bigger bad out there feeling in the Joss Whedon cut. So that's something that's a huge improvement, and not just an improvement that Darkseid exists and that there is like this Satan out there that the Justice League's going to have to destroy. But just Steppenwolf in general. Oh my god, dude! Not to compare the two movies every chance I can, but Steppenwolf is just garbage in the Joss Whedon version. And it's not like he's like the most amazing villain in the Zack Snyder cut, but holy shit, he has like a motivation. He wants to impress his boss. Also, the costumes were so different. If you look back and look up what Steppenwolf looked like in Joss Whedon Justice League, it is like vomit inducing. It is just not good. I kind of like his spiky uniform that he's got going on in Zack Snyder's version. It's really edgy, but it's an improvement, just like everything.
That's right, Steppenwolf. I was trying to think of that name. Thank you. The scene with
no
him
problem.
fighting the Amazonians and stuff. I've never seen Lord of the Rings, but I hear there's a lot of Lord of the Rings comparisons, and
That's fair.
The scene with him fighting the Amazonians, it's just so fucking good and ambitious and epic, and obviously the flashback showing like the Green Lantern and everyone together fighting's huge and big as well, but just seeing Steppenwolf take on like people on horses and just throw the fucking horses, and I think he cuts someone's head off, and showing the Amazonians go through the temple and sacrificing themselves and how that works. It just feels so huge, and the mythology just feels so rich to me, more so than it ever really did, even in the other films, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. Yeah, Steppenwolf is brutal. Like his fight scenes are so good, and originally that fight scene with the Amazonians was like way freaking trimmed down. You didn't really you felt like you were going through the motions in the original film, whereas now I actually felt like a sense of epic proportion. Like, okay, how do you make the villain somewhat intriguing but not interact with the heroes yet? Well, you have them, beat up the island of Themyscirans that you've seen in a couple other movies now at this point. It kind of makes you care. Yeah, it's just you will probably not be surprised to know the whole like mythology of like the ancient gods and all of the warriors of Earth that drove away Darkseid and Steppenwolf, or not Steppenwolf, but they drove away Darkseid and the Apocalypse Empire. It was like Zeus's son, and then like you said, that Green Lantern guy. None of that was in the Joss Whedon Justice League. Like literally zero of that. That's completely new stuff. So in getting that flashback, you completely recontextualize the mother boxes, the whole plot, what the bad guys are actually trying to do, and why they're so pissed off at Earth. It adds so much, because now instead of just being, well, it's arbitrary, everybody wants Earth because we're freaking, self-absorbed. Of course, it's about Earth. Now there's an actual like reason. Oh, a bunch of badasses kicked your ass like a billion years ago. Now I have a motivation for all of the villains, not just Steppenwolf at this point.
Yeah, and shit, I just totally forgot my point. Oh yeah, speaking of recontextualizing, I don't like, so for instance, an argument I've heard is like Amazing Spider-Man is a worse film because Amazing Spider-Man 2 sucked, and therefore the mystery of the first film's gone. And I don't really see it that way. I get it. subjectively, but like I don't think that like so we'll say I don't know, Amazing Spider-Man was like a B movie. I don't think it's a B minus because a mystery goes nowhere. I just think it's a B movie that unfortunately goes nowhere in its sequel, which a lot of it's building up to. Um,
Right.
so I don't like excusing movies with the sequels and saying like, oh well, you know, Captain America one's. No, I mean, I like it, but it's fine. But it's even better when the second one comes out and you see that. I don't really see things that way, but it's a rare instance where I have to say maybe my least favorite part of BVS is actually kind of excused in this version by making that email sequence. It felt like a teaser chain. Like it felt like previews before you go to the movie theater. And it's just like the
For
Justice League
sure.
lineup of all their upcoming movies or and characters. Making that so important to the plot of this film makes that feel so much less indulgent now. And I haven't seen BVS again after watching Justice League yet, but I feel like that as well as a nightmare sequence, which the nightmare sequence, whether it made sense or not in the theatrical version, you know, it was a cool scene at least. I mean, it was at least entertaining, whereas I thought the preview stuff was goofy, but both those things I think are kind of made better, and it makes BVS a better movie in some ways because instead of it all just kind of going nowhere, now at least it goes a few steps farther and makes sense on a wider picture level.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely right, and I agree that every movie should be judged on its own merits, and that's kind of a cop out to be like, oh well, sequels made the old movies better, and I don't really agree with that either. Still those movies, but that is kind of the goal for these big cinematic universes, isn't it? Especially if you carry over a director like. You think like the Russo brothers were not thinking about Avengers Endgame when they were making Infinity War? Of course they were at that point. And I feel like that's what Zack Snyder was trying to do with BVS. Like he had his Justice League in his brain in making BVS and planning out those scenes, and that's pretty clear now. Just kind of seeing it as like as one story, obviously across multiple movies, definitely makes everything kind of feel like it meshes together, and in more ways than one. Not just like plot teases and things like that, but Batman versus Superman kind of feels like it has more of a purpose now. Now that this version of Justice League exists, because if you look at Batman's character arc, just so much more satisfying now. I mean, because you have his arc in BVS where he's jaded and he's pissed, he wants to kill Superman, and he's succumbing to his own fear, which is ironic because Batman's all about overcoming your fear. And now in Justice League, he is reborn. He's inspired by Superman and the sacrifice that he made. So he brings the Justice League together. And some of my favorite dialogue in the movie is him talking about faith and believing that things will work out and not always using his detective deductive reasoning and all of that. And Alfred's kind of like, oh, you don't ever talk this way. Who are you? And where's Bruce Wayne? I love that stuff because it gives Bruce an actual character arc across two movies. And I think it's done really well now that we see the full thing come together.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And my favorite part of the movie personally is Bruce putting the team together. I always just kind of love those sequences. Even when I didn't plan on seeing the movie, seeing the trailers, and I think originally it's goofy, but it's a cliche, but they were playing like Seven Nation Army or some shit by White Stripes, and Bruce is in the Aquaman tavern, and then he's going to meet up with Flash, and he's like, I'm putting together a team. That's fun. I don't know. I think it's just one of those, like, we talked about this before on the show, but those cliches that we just love, like the hero and villain teaming up, which this film also does, ironically. Putting together a team, always fun. I'm always up for that.
Right? They do that very well, which is good because it's basically an hour and a half of the film, I think. They make all of the recruitment scenes are better. In the Joss Whedon cut, it's just so focused on cringe humor. Like when he recruits Aquaman, it's reshot so that the dialogue is more focused on making fish jokes. There's two fish jokes about how he controls fish, instead of him like actually talking about him wanting to do it. Like, and then in recruiting Flash, it's instead of like kind of having a more heartfelt conversation that's drawn out a little longer, big jokes, and Flash makes a joke about brunch that is just it's I don't know. The original cut of Justice League was just making too many jokes. It had no substance, and it's just God, it's refreshing to get what we got now. Because I agree, recruiting all of those heroes is definitely a highlight.
I also do you think that this could be viewed as basically a limited series? Because the way it's broken up with chapters, and to my understanding it was supposed to be released that way, but there's some contractual issue for some reason where it couldn't be released as a series, but it could be released as a movie. I'm not sure. I don't understand that stuff, but I have heard that rumor. I mean, if somebody was intimidated by the length, I would say you could watch this as like a 5 or 6 episode TV series, or how many chapters there are.
Yeah, there are 7 parts and the epilogue. So really it's cut up into 8, probably more or less half-hour chunks.
And I think that
I mean, that's a good point. I still think this is a full, a movie, with a vision on it. But that being said, if they had to decide to go the route of like releasing it as a limited series thing, like one of the new Marvel shows, it could have been done. I think it would have felt disjointed because you really just want to get right into the next part every time one ends, right? Yeah, I've seen that comparison. I think it's pretty accurate with just how much content that we get and how many stories we're getting here.
yeah, especially because I think it even breaks it up in the buffer or the scrubbing tab or whatever the fuck you call it in the streaming service HBO Max. I think they even like mark it for you so you could see, but I think watching it as a feature-length film, it's kind of rewarding because of the length. Breaking up into chapters makes you feel like you're making progress. I think it makes the movie a bit more digestible. Like, I didn't take any full breaks while watching it, but there was like a point where I actually watched it with Maureen, and there's a point where we ordered pizza, and then we took a break to go wash the dishes for like 2 minutes. You could stretch your legs real quick, and you don't feel like you have to do it mid dialogue.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we did that a couple times too. I think we were cooking dinner through like parts 1 and 2. Then we went to get dinner so that we could eat and take a couple minute break, and then started part 3. So yeah, we were in that same boat, but we didn't take any like long intermission or continue it the next day or anything like that. Which again is testament to the pacing. I think it's overall pretty good for a movie of this length, which usually that doesn't happen. You might be unsurprised to know that characters actually get backstories in this version. Cyborg and the Flash were garbage characters in the Justice League from Joss Whedon, and they just had 0 time spent with them as characters, like almost nothing. And in this movie, you get a significant amount of time spent with both of them, which is good because the other 4 characters in the Justice League, other movies that they've starred in. This is super important for the Flash and Cyborg to be good characters. And if they're not, they just end up feeling tacked on, which is how I felt about the original Justice League cut. Because all the stuff with Cyborg and his mother and his resentment towards his father and his edginess, his broodiness, like it has no reason in the original cut. He's just there to be moody, and seeing him actually get a freaking story is really, like you said earlier in the podcast, like the heart of the film. Like, that wasn't even there back years ago.
And one thing I want to bring up, and this is a scene that easily could have been cut probably, and I'm sure would have been if it was released in theaters, but the scene where he helps out that woman down on her luck and gives her the money in the ATM, like that to me is so rewarding and makes Cyborg so endearing. Does it contribute directly to the momentum of the plot? No. It's an aside for sure, and it's a detour, but it's a scenic detour that allows you to bond with this character in a way that makes you care about him so much more later on down the road.
Absolutely. And I think people sometimes just don't understand what storytelling is and how it works. But even though it doesn't feed into the plot, it feeds into the story because a plot is just, the skeleton of a story, if you will. You need moments like that for the characters to breathe, especially when you have this many characters, so that they can show you what they're all about and what they believe in and why they would be considered a hero in some way. Um, you know, I really love that scene. They do a good job making it very sympathetic in just a couple minutes, and man, that's a couple minutes well spent. I mean, give me longer movies, especially if the movies have like six main characters, because you really need the time to spend with them, even if it's a few extra minutes, so that you care about them when the plot does kick into high gear. One of my biggest criticisms of the Avengers is that I don't care about Hulk, Hawkeye, or Black Widow like at all in the original couple Avengers movies. I just don't feel like you ever get enough time spent with them, or at least quality time, right? I think this movie also has six characters like the original Avengers, but I did not feel like there was a weak link among the six. And I certainly feel that way about the original Avengers.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And one character, because we talked about Cyborg a bit, Flash. I'm not always a fan of Ezra Miller. He's been in some things I liked him in. I think he's a bit hammy sometimes with his acting. He's definitely an overactor, which most people love. He's a very celebrated actor, and that's great. He's definitely not a bad actor, but I'm just not personally always into his performance style. But I felt like in this one, it was the first time I saw him as Flash and actually totally bought it. And his humor, there's some cringe jokes in it still that you'd be kind of surprised in this movie. Like the one, he talks about being because he runs so fast, he burns tons of calories. So he says he's a black hole, and he corrects himself as a snack hole and stuff like that. And in an Avengers movie, that'd be every character. But in this movie, it's just him. And it actually makes him more endearing, even if the jokes don't always land. Because when there's one comedic relief character like that, and he is younger, and he is Ezra Miller, who I think finds a perfect balance between seriousness and jokes, and even his backstory with his father, I think, is very touching and rewarding ultimately in the film. It just adds so much more. His role in this movie reminded me almost of Beast Boy in the Teen Titans show. But he's really good in it. I think he added a lot to the movie, and I don't know his original place in the original one, but I was not enthused to see him as Flash or anything, just because there's nothing to base it on for me. But now I am, and I hope to see more of this character because I like him.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. What it comes down to is his character believable? So, some of the cringe humor and the jokes that don't land as much as others is part of who he is as like a person. If he actually existed, it would make sense that he's awkward and nervous around literal legends like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. Like, I don't know. I'd be pretty nervous if I was the Flash and was like a newcomer, was like around all these amazing people. So everything that he does, like, feels like it would be something that he would do.
Yeah,
the original cut of the film, I have to bring up, the climax is very different in the Joss Whedon cut. It's not about stopping like Darkseid coming and knocking on their door. It's just about whatever. It's never really explained. In Flash, instead of building up charge and momentum so that Cyborg can save the day, what Flash does in the original Justice League is go save a random Russian family who is still in this like abandoned town, and he just like collects them and runs them away so that they don't die.
I've heard about that, and I've heard it seems to be the least popular part of that movie. That, and of course the mustache. But I mean, I get why it's such an issue, but it's almost like to bring the mustache up will be like a nitpick in the grander scheme. But like, I always hear about the Russian family and how pointless and stupid it is.
Yeah, but exactly like what they did with the Flash is completely rewrite his climax so that it like doesn't, have any weight. Whereas what he does in the climax of this cut is one of my new favorite sequences in any superhero movie. My jaw was on the floor when Flash turns back time and runs Earth back into existence. Shit like that is like premier delicious prime rib Flash content, because Flash always does crazy shit like that in DC. Um, just turning back time, doing amazing things with his speed, and that was when I knew. I was like, oh my god, Zack Snyder absolutely understands the Flash. This is freaking amazing.
Yeah, and the fact that they bring up like that's his one rule, he doesn't want to break it. And then they really milk that climax. And after so much build up, that's exactly what needed to do. Where each character has something to do, and it's equally exciting in my opinion. I mean, Cyborg going into the mother boxes is compelling with his internal struggle. Cyborg running and then getting injured. Batman taking down all the, I forget what they're called now, the henchmen, alien bugs.
Yeah, the parademons.
That's it, parademons. And then I think Wonder Woman and Aquaman, they're taking on Steppenwolf, I believe. Up until that point,
which is really cool. In the Joss Whedon cut, they never talked to each other. Wonder Woman and Aquaman never spoke a word to each other, other than Aquaman sat on the lasso of truth and called her hot. That's it. That's it. Whereas in this version of the film, you actually get kind of like a touching subplot about like, oh, the Atlanteans and the Themyscirians, they're like the same, like it's a universality that they discover by working together to fight Steppenwolf. They actually respect each other. None of that exists in the original movie.
Yeah, and that's something that I love about DC, and that's something that I bring up a lot with Aquaman, because some people will talk about, oh, it's just Thor. And I say, well, if that's the cultural toolbox that you're drawing from, I mean, it's a film about a character literally named King Arthur. They didn't take it from the movie Thor. This is Arthurian legend they're retelling. And what I love about the DC and the DCEU is that they do go into archetypes. They do go into what some would call cliches, but they're doing it to celebrate. They're doing it to bring it new life. And that's one thing in the movie that I thought was definitely one of those things where it's like two people of different cultures that are opposed to one another that come to mutual understanding, but it's very understated in this film and approached so well, where they don't linger on it. It's not like, Wonder Woman calls him fish breath or something like that, and he sticks his tongue out like they probably did in the original film, I'm sure.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's just something more to give the team a little bit more depth, and it adds so much despite being so little of the film's runtime.
Absolutely. And then so when they work together in double fatality, Steppenwolf, you feel that. That is way more epic when you know that these characters have like to respect each other and see eye to eye on some level. It's just basic filmmaking, You have build up and then you have release. Like you said, that's what this climax does very well. You've been waiting for it just the whole movie, and everybody's character arc gets tested, and every character really gets a chance to shine. My other favorite scenes in this movie is when Superman is getting his new black suit, which is in itself a reference, like the Superman Doomsday arc in the comics and the cartoons, which looks sick. I love it. I love them taking both of his father's lines from the previous films and splicing them over top each other when he's walking through his ship, and then just the way they build that up with the music and the Hans Zimmer Man of Steel theme and drinks in the sunlight and all that stuff. Like, man, that is a pitch perfect Superman moment. And a lot of people like to say that Zack Snyder doesn't understand Superman, but that's just what Superman is. Like, boom, you nailed it right there. Just 2 minutes of pure what Superman is.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many moments of this film where it does let the characters or even the scenery just breathe. Like when you see the Clark's farm or the Clark's farm, geez, when you see the Kent farm and it's put up for sale, and then at the end you get a great character moment with Bruce Wayne where he talks about he buys it even though the bank had already bought it. And Clark asks, how do you do that? And Bruce says, I bought the bank. That's a great little Bruce Wayne moment. But also there's a scene where you just see, like, I think it's like the tires swing out in the yard and you see the grass blowing. And it's very like Days of Heaven. Like this pastoral scene, or it's like the farmhouse stuff in the Last of Us games almost. Like, but when you're ready to start the game. And does it move the plot forward? Could you trim a minute or two off by getting rid of that? Sure, you could, but you would diminish the quality of the art if you did, because it adds so much.
Absolutely, and you can say that about almost everything in this film. I think it harkens back. It pays respects to the character, where they came from, like whole swing set and all that stuff. All that imagery was in place since Man of Steel 8 years ago. So I mean, it actually feels like there is a cohesion of a cinematic universe here, calling back on things that actually were important all along, and all of these things. And it's just really enjoyable. One thing I will say in relation to like the farmstead scenes and all of that stuff, I do feel like, and really this has always been the case, I love Lois Lane. I think she's a cool character, and I like Amy Adams as an actress. I will say that both Lois Lane and then Superman's mom, Martha Kent, they definitely just feel like tools for the plot to progress like Superman's arc of like, oh, you gotta be sad for 2.5 hours of the movie so that we can remember that we're supposed to be sad. And that's basically like what they're there for at this point.
Yeah, I could see that, especially because, and this is kind of the thing for me, I didn't care for Amy Adams' Lois Lane, even though I like both characters. I just never felt she was the right choice. I wanted the typical original Superman, the movie Richard Donner version, and she was not that. But rewatching the movies, I realized how much more she has to do in them, especially the director's cut of BVS compared to the theatrical cut, where it actually explains half the shit she's doing with her investigation into the bullets and all that. But Man of Steel, rewatching it first, I was like, wow, she's actually doing a lot of Lois Lane stuff. It's just a different pitch that I'm used to. And that's so much of these movies where it's like, oh wait, this actually is Superman, but it's showing a different stage of his character development, or showing a different part of Batman's life, where Superman's is before, Batman's is after we know these characters. And one of the most fascinating things I've come to realize about Zack Snyder's approach to these films, and he always gets ragged on for all the Christ imagery and all that, and it's there in this one for sure. But
oh, absolutely. I mean, if anything, he just went and did it harder.
Oh, that one Superman scene when he comes back and he just does the fucking cruciform in space. It's so,
honestly, I didn't even care.
Oh,
I
it's
was
amazing.
Like, you know what? Just give it to me. Just feed it to me. I mean, I think there comes a point where you either have to completely reject it and don't let it inside your body, or just embrace it fully and just be like, you know what? Super on the nose. Like, not every superhero needs to be Jesus. But honestly, like that moment was so good otherwise that I was just like, you know what? They earned that crucifixion pose. I don't even care anymore.
Oh, I saw someone posted and said he made it the background on his computer, and I was like, fuck yeah, I might too.
It's epic. It's really good. There's some moments in Man of Steel that are like not as epic, so it's easier to make fun of. Um, I don't know. I mean, the way I see making fun of that is just it's easy pickings, right? Like, oh, this is the auteur artistic superhero stuff, but at the same time, like the easiest thing to compare superhero to is like a Christ-like figure, and that's why I was thinking that the Snyder Cut was not going to be the best because some of the trailers for Zack Snyder's Justice League really leaned heavily into like these superheroes are martyrs and like I think I don't think it was Hallelujah. It was another song.
There was
The most
Hallelujah.
recent trailer before the movie came out. It was like depicting a mother box version of all of these characters on a cube and like dude half of the characters were posed like Jesus and I was just like why what are we doing here so it can certainly be way too indulgent but they kept it to a minimum in the actual movie only a little bit of Christ action this time.
Yeah, the marketing for this film was not the strongest in my opinion. I don't know if they knew how to sell it because like some of them focused heavier on the new footage. Some of them, like you said, there's that concept trailer with the mother, which I thought was like it was on the nose, but at least it was kind of cool where it had its own aesthetic and shit. At least it was memorable. But like for the most part, to me, the Hallelujah one was the best. The first debut trailer I think was the best one and the most exciting. But like I felt like they didn't know how to market this film because I wasn't sure what to think of it before it came out because of the way they presented it.
Yeah, I don't have like the silver bullet as to how you would market this film. Whatever they did is like I guess it worked. I mean, people are talking about it. I mean, people want to see it now, people who were like non-believers before. That being said, part of the reason why I thought this version wasn't going to be that good was because I thought the marketing was weak. So that's why I was so surprised when I actually watched it, and I was like, "Oh, it's good. Oh, it's good, good." Like I get further into the movie, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I love this." The marketing didn't really have me believing in that before the movie, so it is what it is. I don't know what you would have done differently, but it was really kind of too heavy-handed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Going back to the Christ stuff though, there's two things I find interesting with it. Is that like originally watching the movie, it's like, oh, it's Christ stuff, okay. But I always say the same thing. Where like, if you're gonna criticize this, then we also have to criticize a Planet of the Apes trilogy, which nobody ever does. And I actually think it's much more intrusive in that series because in Dawn, he's just basically Jesus in it out of nowhere, because in Rise I didn't think they did that as much, at least that I recall. And then in War, and I love all three of these movies, so I'm not like criticizing them. You could listen to a review. It just completely takes over the whole plot, and like the entire epilogue of that movie is just being like, yeah, he's Moses, and it sucks, and it's the worst part of the movie by far, and maybe the worst part of the trilogy for me, where it's like, we're just gonna do a nonsensical ending. It's a borderline Deus Ex Machina just because we want this fucking parallel. But the thing that's interesting in this is that everyone's like, oh, Superman's Jesus, and that can be true, but like I think so much of it is actually getting the audience to view him as Jesus by doing these things, but showing, especially in BVS, that he isn't. He's Superman, and he's still moral. He still has to make decisions, and they're not always right ones. And as he's figuring it out through these movies, he has to deal with the consequences of not only being human and having human error, but being human and being seen as a god and having the power of a god. And I think that's what makes it interesting. And I think that with that approach and with showing Batman after he's lost all decency, as well as Superman before he's gained it, it's actually comparable to how Martin Scorsese depicts Christ and the different biblical characters in the Last Temptation of Christ. I actually think the approach is very similar, and the controversy with the characters is very similar. But whereas people in retrospect see Last Temptation of Christ like, oh, it's showing Jesus in a very provocative manner, in which he's imperfect. I think in time people will grow to understand that with Superman, that, oh, these are deliberate choices to show him out of his element.
Right. No, I can definitely see that. I mean, it comes full circle. I mean, at least you have the audacity to be like, I believe in this imagery, and I'm going to commit to it for 3 movies throughout 3 films. As if you screw it up and give it to another director, well, then you're just, even the small things like that, the aesthetic choices, they're gonna be gone. So I mean, it feels like it's fitting. It feels like it's fitting that it's in there. So when he made that pose and flew up into space and silhouetted by the sun, I was like, yep, that makes sense. This is the Zack Snyder trilogy of DC movies. That makes sense.
And it is like a resurrection too of the film itself. There's so many parallels that make the film so much more rewarding because of the struggle to get it released and because of the unfortunate backstory that's plagued it, unfortunately. But it does also voyeuristically make the art better. For instance, there's a dialogue sequence in which I think Clark thanks Bruce for, bringing him back and everything that he's done, and Bruce says something like, I was just making a wrong that I was writing a wrong that never should have happened. And I made a joke. I was like, that could be in reference to the Joss Whedon version of the movie.
Yeah, pretty much. I gotta love how art imitates life.
And it's almost creepy watching the movie at certain points. And, obviously so much of it's framing it in our minds with this narrative. But it just seems like there's sequences that are just directly just riffing on the fact that the other version exists and is lesser, but they were filmed so much further before that it doesn't make sense. And I doubt they were put in there through editing just because of that parallel. It feels like pure coincidence, but it is funny.
I do agree. I think it just kind of happened to be that way. And it's like you said, it's more beautiful. We can frame it as like, aha, look at that, wink, wink. Like this was meant to be, kind of, because it makes it feel more significant in that way. Man, I'm just glad that we finally got this film. Because like I wasn't excited for it because I just had no idea. Like I said before, it was educational. I had no idea you could release a movie in theaters. Obviously, I knew about the director change and the interference. But that you could release a movie in theaters and then release a different version of that same film. I don't even want to call it the same film. 4 years later, just cannot overstate this enough. Every single thing is different. Every single thing. Story, characters, tone, color, framing, context, the score. Everything is different between the 2 versions of Justice League. So I've seen a lot of people online be like, well, the first version sucks, so I don't want to give this version a chance. And just saying that is completely unfounded. That is complete, because I've seen both. I know for sure that that's just unfounded. So if you are prejudging the Snyder Cut based on the 2017 Justice League, you're just wrong. You're just wrong because it's factually all different. I don't know what to tell you. So if you like DC, give this a chance. Because you owe it to yourself if you like any of these characters, basically.
Yeah, and speaking of that, and speaking because you've brought up non-believers before in this episode, I feel like this film is much more accessible to people. It's not deconstructing anything. It's a straightforward Justice League movie. But I think what really drew people into this one more so than the others that maybe didn't care for the first 2 films in the trilogy is that the film wears its heart on its sleeve. And the other films I do think had heart, and I do think they had a lot of it. However, I think this film does in a way that's just more palatable to people, and I think the straightforwardness helps. I think obviously the cast helps and the
Mm.
structure helps, but I think the real thing that gets people connecting with it is the stuff like the scene with Cyborg or the Flash's scene and all of that. I think that the movie just has such a big heart, and I just think it's so operatic and huge and ambitious. It's just it's hard not to get swept up in the excitement of it. It really is like a blockbuster crowd pleaser in the truest sense of the word.
No, it absolutely is. But while having a concrete vision at the same time. I mean, these are the kind of blockbusters that I want to get. And honestly, I think, I guess, is this the best DC extended universe movie now at this point? Is that true for you?
I mean, I could get into that. It would give away my final thoughts on the movie. But if you want to get right into that,
That's
I can.
true. That's true. Are we ready to rate this movie, or are there other elements that we wanted to talk about?
I feel like I could talk about this movie probably for the length of the movie, but it would probably
Right. I did make that
eventually.
joke when I started. I was like, I'm for our 4 hour cut of this podcast.
Yeah, we'll release that in a few years, but we'll edit it down.
Yeah, no, you have to really build that up for a while first. You got to earn it.
For me personally, it's so weird to say it, and it's really taken days, I guess a whole week, of just thinking about it, letting it sit in my mind, comparing it with other movies. But I really not just for the DCEU, but superhero movies in general. I can't think of another film that's ever made as much of an impact on me. My favorite superhero movie's always been Spider-Man 2. That's the film that got me into Spider-Man. That's the film that got me into comic book movies. Or not comic book movies, but superhero movies, I should specify, because I wasn't into superheroes before that. But thinking about, especially this past year in 2020 and how difficult it's been, thinking about all of my life struggles and how much of an inspiration Zack Snyder's been, that he got this out, that he has another movie coming out this year that he's directed after all this has happened, and the criticism he's faced, everything he's went up against, and now to see this victory lap, and to see people who I know did not like his other movies celebrating this movie, like not just liking it, but like fucking loving it. I don't think Maureen gives a shit about Zack Snyder, but she said it was one of the best movies she'd seen in a very long time. Just being a
Right.
movie and a comic book fan, and I really have to say, in retrospect, and being so happy with the movie, I don't want to say this as a hype thing, but on a very profound artistic level, as well as just getting me through the pandemic and thinking like, I don't want to. It's not in too dark of a way. Don't overanalyze this, but those weeks it's hard to get through, and you just ah, I just think like, all right, just keep cool. The Snyder Cut's coming out. Just look forward to that. That'll be something. And then to see it, and it's not just as good as you want to do it. It's like 20 times better because you think it's going to be hopefully a 7. But when it comes out and
Right.
it's this good, for me personally, I think it's the best superhero movie I've ever seen, which is fucking insane.
Yeah, no, that's high praise. And it's not up there that far for me, but I did finish watching it, and I thought to myself, like, this is easily top 10 superhero movie for me. And since I've seen like 60 of them, I don't even know anymore how many there are. Um, that's pretty high. I'm not sure where it would fall in the rankings specifically, but it's up there. It's up there, and I think it's the best thing that's come out of the DCEU. I think it is. I really still have a soft spot for Man of Steel, and that's was my favorite for sure. Before all of this, Wonder Woman's also very good. Um, but yeah, man, if they can continue cranking out quality movies like this, I would absolutely want them to continue with making DC movies, and let DC have its time in the sun. The Infinity Saga is over for Marvel, and they're doing a bunch of Disney Plus shows. Like, let DC run its course in the movies for the next few years. Like, that could turn out being incredible. And of course, should be a sequel to the Snyder Cut. You know, they didn't beat all the bad guys. You know, Darkseid is still out there. It's a really an excellent tease, and I alluded to earlier. They made that epilogue 30 minutes because they want to appeal to some studio execs to be like, huh? Yeah, see all the ideas we have. Um, I honestly think with all the hype, all the difference that fans can make these days, that's also very inspiring to me. The movie itself is very optimistic, like you said, but let's just like sit back and appreciate that. I don't think without the era of the internet and people coming together to like bond over a thing, that we would have gotten this Snyder cut. But man, people were consistent. They were they were really just passionate about being outspoken about wanting this cut of the movie. I have to believe that, you know, the public opinion on that helped get this into existence for us to see. So that's honestly just kind of inspiring too. Like consumers actually have power, more power than they used to. Um, I mean, like the fans basically the backlash changed the Sonic the Hedgehog character design in that movie. Like fans have power these days, and it's just kind of fascinating to see that in action as well.
No, that's very true. And I think about as much as I love the movie and as happy as I am it's out, I'm equally excited because I feel like there's already been one that's been filmed. But imagine how good the documentary on all this is going to be.
Oh yeah, no, that would be super insightful. We gotta wait another 4 years or 40 years. We'll see.
That'll be worth it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that's part of the like legendary status of this film now. Is there's a story around the actual fictional story, more so than most movies.
I mean, it really is a once in a lifetime event. Just everything surrounding it is just so insane and unprecedented and just crazy. I mean, it's just a fascinating project from top to bottom.
No, yeah, it really is. There are some there are some blemishes I think here and there, but there's nothing too big that is distracting in this movie. For me, this is an easy 9 out of 10. You know, there are some stylistic choices that I'm like, you know, very subjectively just not a fan of because I think some of that stuff for Snyder can be overplayed. But the stuff that matters in this movie is gotten right. You know, he understands the characters. They all get room to breathe. The movie is severely epic when the original cut was really nothing but mediocre. So really, I can't ask for more.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with that completely. There's definitely some things in it that don't quite work for me. Like I said, there's some jokes that fall flat. There is some CGI that's not the best. I personally think that Warner Media and especially the Justice League movies have always had a little bit of lackluster CGI. Even in like BVS and Man of Steel, like when like Superman's lifting the rocket, or in Aquaman when they're like floating in the water, it always just seems off. It's not as good as it should be, in my opinion. It's not like Weta levels or anything, and for movies of this caliber, they should be that good. This film is a little more understandable with the budget limitations, but that is a factor. The epilogue goes on a little bit too long, but it's also rewarding in its own way. But it is something that stands out. But for me, I give it a 9.5 out of 10 because there are imperfections, there are blemishes. But considering it's a 4-hour movie, I can easily excuse that. And with the backstory of it, with everything behind the scenes, it makes it an easy 10 for me. So you can look at that however you want. But I would say, judging it just as a movie, 9.5.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And again, there's always that what's your movie critic opinion, and then like in your heart, what does this movie mean to you kind of thing. And for some of your favorite things, at least for me, you know, that's kind of like why I tilt over the edge and be like, ah, this is a masterpiece, it's perfect. Um, and I'll definitely rewatch this movie. I'm actually going to. It's only been a week, but I'm going to rewatch this movie when my brother watches it for the first time because he's a huge DC guy and he's just flabbergasted that this is good. And I've been hyping him up a whole lot. So I'm excited to share it with other people and just be like, hey, look, this movie's good. Even my dad is a DC fan and grew up on Super Friends and stuff, and he didn't like he liked the Justice League we got too much. I'm gonna be like, hey dad, there's like a good Justice League now. You might want to watch it. And I think that's just kind of really exciting opportunity that we can all kind of share in now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been about the same. I think you watched it maybe the same day as me actually. But it's been a week for me. I saw it Friday, so I guess it's been a week as of an hour and a half ago. And I'm already planning my next viewing of it. I meant to rewatch it before this discussion, but I started watching The Righteous Gemstones, which is also on HBO Max, and I just binged the shit out of that because that was a really good show. But I am planning on rewatching this probably Wednesday.
Hashtag not sponsored by HBO Max, but we can be if you want.
I would love
HBO.
to be, because I only
Yeah,
got it for
yeah,
the Justice
absolutely.
League, but I'm liking it a lot.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that we've made it, that we got it. It's exciting. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to what they're actually going to do in the future. All that stuff in the alternate dimension with Batman and Joker and just some craziness going on. They're going hard. They're going deep into like the alternate universe, multiple Earth stuff that DC does. From the looks of it. Also, not to mention that there's like a ton more villains now. Lex Luthor's still out there. Deathstroke is out there. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. I don't know how it's going to manifest in like a potential future film, Justice League 2, other standalone movies. Have no idea, but man, there's a lot of possibilities.
I feel the same way. I'm excited to see what happens. I would love it if either A, we just get two more Justice League movies, one leading up to Darkseid's taking over of Earth, maybe ending in the death of Lois Lane. Then the second movie being his post-apocalypse nightmare world that we've seen before, where Joker and Batman reluctantly team up, and Aquaman and Wonder Woman are dead and all that. I think Evil Superman, I think that'd be great to get those two movies. But that's lofty. It really is. So, I mean, as much as I'd love to see that, maybe we'll get a comic, maybe we'll get a movie, maybe we'll get a 2-season TV series or something. But if nothing ever comes of it, I'm just so grateful we got this, and that I think this does work as a conclusion of sorts that leaves the door open for other projects.
I agree. I agree. And honestly, anything's fair game these days. I mean, like you said, you can continue narratives from movies into like TV shows. Marvel's doing that starting this year, and DC could certainly do that if they wanted. Seems like HBO Max is like the DC platform right now. So who knows? That could happen. It's it'll be very interesting seeing how it goes.
Yeah, until then, I'm Todd Crawford.
I'm Eric Zavinski.
We are Too Cool for the Comic Shop.